to hear what you found.
It's great to be here. Thank you all for being willing to wait a little longer before you go home and get lunch. This has been a fascinating process, and what I'm going to do is very selectively. You may not think I am selecting very much, but the written report that will come about is probably going to be about 90 pages long. I'm not going to read all that for you. So yeah, my first applause. So because our purpose in doing this study is really not just about how much money can you raise. It really is looking at a variety of things within the life of the congregation, many of which contribute to the willingness of members of the congregation and friends of the congregation to share what God provides for them. So it really is a composite of many different things, and as Linda noted, a big part of the report comes out of the information that many of you all provided through the course of a number of weeks in the survey. So I'm going to skip around a bit. The report itself, the initial part is simply about background. How did all this start to take shape? And then I look at some demographics in the community, because that has a lot to do with some of the possibilities for ministry. Then I'll go through some of the questions that were in that survey and what that tells us, and then some observations and some recommendations. Some perspective on the community. It's interesting to me that the population of California, of the state of California, has, in the interval between 2000 and 2004, grown by over 12%. Berkeley, as a city, has grown at that same rate, just slightly more than that, in that same 2010 to 2014 period. The zip code in which the church is located, you think it was more or less? Actually, it's less, way less. It grew by less than 5% in that same interval. And probably a part of that is simply because a big part of this zip code's built out. And the other part of that is that the median length of residency in this zip code is high, as in 20 years. That's the median. So there are a lot of people that have been in the community for a lot longer than that. One of the interesting things to me in looking at the age groups, clearly this zip area in which the church is located doesn't have as many children or youth in it that Berkeley has, or that the state of California has. But when you get up the line age-wise, it switches. Just look around and you see the evidence of that. Age 65 to 74, in this zip, almost 14% of this zip is in that age range of 65 to 74, as compared to Berkeley's at almost 7%, and California's 6.5%. So those dynamics have a lot to do with how the congregation does its ministry. And I would want to say the density in this zip code of older adults, 55 years and above, I think indicates a very promising mission field for your new senior adult ministries. That gives A+ a lot of potential out there in your neighborhood. This is not California now. This is your neighborhood has that going on. And that predominance of that age level also says a lot about the facilities from the standpoint that not only do they need to be accessible, they need to be easily accessible. And that's an important part of the whole formula. On the other end of that spectrum, while this zip has smaller young ages, there's still a substantial portion of the population that's elementary and younger, and even youth years. So that too has a lot of potential for the ministries of the church in terms of the long-range planning and the priorities. So there's a lot of substantiation, it seems to me, about ministry potential just in looking at the demographics of the community. And I think it gives you the opportunity really to capitalize on the strengths of this congregation. Where's the nearest reconciling congregation? I don't know. So that's not simply a rhetorical question. You have a presence in this community that nobody else has as a community of faith. And I think that's an important ingredient of who you are as a church and as a culture that really does live out its faith. I mean, to participate in the worship service this morning really demonstrated to me the recurring comments that I had in the personal interviews, the face-to-face interviews, and that came out in the other SurveyMonkey and written documents. We want to be a welcoming community, and you demonstrate that. It probably didn't happen overnight, but it's who you are now. And that too is an element that you can begin to celebrate. You're also a very highly educated community, both in terms of Berkeley and in terms of this zip. What percentage of residents in this zip would you guess completed a graduate degree? It's 94707. Yeah. I heard a lot of guesses. Some are pretty high, but it's just under 30%. But in terms of Berkeley at large, it's 23, a little over 23. State of New Mexico is 7.5. So recognize that you as a faith community have those same ingredients. You have access in the community to a lot of people, and you are the model for a lot of people through this faith community. Median household income in this zip 139,000 plus, median. Berkeley, about half that, 70,000, and it goes down from there, 66,000 in the state of California. Income at the level of 150,000 a year to 200,000 a year in this zip, over 15%, and that's twice as much as Berkeley or California. Again, I'm telling you statistics that help describe some of the strengths of this congregation and some of the ways in which ministry can grow from where you are now. Income 200,000 or more annually. This one may be a little surprising. Almost 30% for this zip. So the sense that we don't have a lot doesn't bear out statistically in the community. It's just, that doesn't mean everybody here makes that, has that income, but it means that across the board, there are those who have wealth and who have the capacity, financial capacity, to be generous if they also have the willingness to be generous. Okay, I asked early on for some statistical data about the congregation itself. One of those was what's happening in terms of average attendance. And since 2011, it's been fairly even. There was a big dip. Well, it started out in 2011 at 135. It dropped to 132, went back up to 134. Then it took a big dip down to 125. Last year, it was in a recovery trend at 129. So while there is some stability there, I asked Linda for what's happened the last, what's happened the last 6 months, the first 6 months of this year, and that has averaged 138. It has not been at that level for a number of years. So recognize a trend in the presence of people to share in Christian worship with each other. I ask about membership, and across the same 5 years of 2011 through 15, membership did go up, but there is an interesting historical scope to all of that. How many of you were around in 1953 when the merger happened? Okay, we got one. All right, two. Okay. At the time of the merger, there were 1,070 members, just over that, just over the 1,070. That dropped a little bit, went back up a little bit. At the time of the merger of the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren, it took a dip after that. I don't know whether that was because of the merger or not. It just timed that way. And then in the 90s, it dropped down into the 200s in 1995. And then in 2001, it dropped down below 250 and started coming back up above 250 in 2010. Finished 2015 at 294. 6 new members and 2 deaths this year puts it right at 300. We're almost there. We're at 299. But, and have not been at that level since 1995. Okay? Recognize something is happening here that hadn't been going on for a while. And across the years, it's, I think this is a neat figure. What is it, right at 3,000 people? Yeah, more than 3,000 individuals have been members of this church since the merger. It's left its mark on a lot of people. A lot of lives have been impacted by what happens here. Total contributions, again, across that same interval, 2011, we were at 193,000. Last year, 262,000. And this is giving, doesn't count building rentals and things, the income from investments, those kinds of things. This is giving of the members of the congregation. So that growth of almost $70,000 is about 27% from where it was in 2011. Again, I asked Linda for the figures, what's been going on in the first 6 months of this year? And compared, what she provided for me was the comparison between the first 6 months of last year and the first 6 months of this year. $7,000 more given in the first 6 months of this year than in the first 6 months. And this is broken down. And then with the building use fees, there's been a $7,000 increase in the first 6 months of this year. You're seeing some positive trends in all of this. And I would say they're not minute. They're also very significant in terms of the ways in which members and friends of this congregation are participating and giving and being aware of what's going on here. The giving per attendee in the 5 years between 2011 and 2015. And I will say this is way ahead of what Methodists are doing generally. Here, it went from a little over $1,400 a year in 2011 to a little over $2,000 the last year. That's the average giving per attendee. You know, that's a contrived figure, but again, I think it's an indicator of some things going on in the congregation. Okay, so these are really your statistics, both demographically and congregationally. Now, what about the survey? I did, I think, 30 different face-to-face interviews. Some of you were involved in those, and that included 46 individuals. Altogether, between the hard copy and SurveyMonkey and the face-to-face, we had 55 surveys returned, and that's what I worked with in terms of understanding what's going on in the hearts and minds of members of the congregation. Won't be any surprise to you that of all of those, and this is everybody who filled out one of the questionnaires, whether that was in person on SurveyMonkey or hard copy, 63% have been members more than 10 years. So there's a lot of experience here. The statistics that I was just sharing with you, that's the life as a congregation that you've been living for the last number of years. I ask, what age range does your age fall? Won't be any surprise. 55% were over 65. But again, that's a big part of the makeup of this congregation. A lot to be celebrated and a lot to have to plan around as we look toward the future. And then I asked a kind of odd question. In your opinion, for the last 12 months, have you felt your church was moving forward, holding steady, or going backward? 84% said moving forward, another good sign. And then, at least in the oral conversations I was having, I asked them, why did they think that was the best of the three options? And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again was the strength of the diversity in the congregation and the openness attitudinally about that diversity. You can have diversity and not be accepting of it. That's not what was happening here. And that was part of the sense of moving forward. Those who said, there were a couple of other things about identification of why they thought it was moving forward. Comment about a readiness to take risk. And some illustrations of that were the main new programs, as I understand it, of the A+, the children's programs. Nobody knew that they would succeed or not, even with the best of planning when you started. But again, a congregation agreed to take risk, becoming a reconciling congregation. And I understand that was done over a length of time to give the opportunity really for conversation and wisdom and prayer and searching. Again, it's a congregation that's willing to take risk. Comment that I got in a variety of different ways was, I like that there's so many children. I go to, sometimes when I'm in Albuquerque on Sunday, I go to Central United Methodist Church, which is a university just across the street from University of New Mexico. It is a university church. We do have 2 worship services, but if you're a child and want to participate in the service, you go to the early one, not to the one that the old folks go to at 11. I just thought your capacity to include, embrace children, give them a place here, they're a part of the experience of worship at their level of capacity. That's great, and people noticed that. Another comment about moving forward was we have lots of new members, and they're taking responsibility. I can point to a bunch of Methodist churches that I know in, South Texas, because that's where I've spent most of my life. They may get new members, but they're not entrusted with any responsibility. And the integration of new members into the congregation is an important thing about what you're doing. And for those who said that they thought the congregation was holding steady, some of that had to do with stewardship. not growing at the same level that probably it could be. And I would point out that a capital campaign does bring a focus onto stewardship from the standpoint of our personal and family values and our readiness to invest in the future of the congregation in a unique way. It's not an annual campaign. It's a very forward-looking kind of process that we would be asking for up to 3 years of financial commitments as part of that. So there's a lot of potentiality for growth in generosity. And part of a capital campaign is really offering the opportunity to anybody who will take it, individuals and families, to move into reflection about their relationship with God and money. And one of the comments that I hear at the end of a lot of those campaigns is, I've made a commitment larger than anything I've ever made, and I had no idea when we started out that that's where we would end up. And the report will have all the kinds of comments that were part of the conversation or that people wrote down. The next question in the survey was about what the building committee had identified in terms of the projects. Probably no surprise. Fellowship hall, parlor, kitchen, office was certainly the predominant one. Well, now let me back up. That issue about seismic retrofit was really the most frequently identified. 90% of the people that turned in or that had conversation about those projects said that was one of the ones really needed to do. Fellowship hall and this area was a close second with 88.5% of the people who turned in a survey, either verbally or one of the other ways. And then there's a big drop-off. But what's important in all of this is that there's now an evidence about the commitment of the congregation for some priorities. And I think the building committee can begin to work with all of that. Safety was a big issue that came up orally in the conversations and in things that were written. I think that was a big part of the seismic retrofit. But there were other things as well. There were a couple of comments that I lifted out of the whole series. One was, I want the church to be a welcoming place. And the more that is evident, the more inclined that I am to give toward it. So what that says is that moving into a capital campaign means that we have a lot of communication to do, to be sure people understand what all the issues are. And another comment was, we are a much more vital congregation than our rooms reflect. Yeah. So, again, lots of good comments in the material that will be part of the report. The next question was, and this one probably seemed like an add-on, but it's really a core issue. The question was, do you believe these projects are an important aspect of your church's mission and ministry? Probably most people don't think about a capital campaign in those terms, but I think it's really important. Of the 55, 44 said yes. That's 85%. Said yes, we think it's important. And I don't want to bore you, but I want to read several of the comments that I think really do point to this in critical ways. One was, we can invest in renovations that are safer and aesthetically more pleasing, or we can do these renovations in the context of a future, whether a congregational future or a community future. That makes our mission, takes our mission to a new level of impact. Maybe turning the whole first floor into something radically different as a unique space will allow us to boldly look at doing things that strengthen our impact, not just with our space, but also with our outreach. Yeah. It's good to have people that think these things through on our behalf, isn't it? You know? Another one, the fundamental nature of the undertaking is to create space to undertake new ministries. Or another one was, we need space where the technology works and provides opportunities. We need to be able to offer it to the community. We need to become more of a community center in that the space would be flexible enough and comfortable enough that the community participation would happen in new ways. We need the sense that we are moving into the future that's more open. Let's see how we can use this building in new ways to be in ministry. I thought that was pretty perceptive. Another one was, we've been making do without these improvements, and we've been fulfilling our mission and ministry. The question is whether we could do more with better facilities. It'll be consistent with an expression of the church's ministry, mission, and ministry only if everyone buys that it's an important part of our mission and ministry. By that, I mean it has to be framed as part of the mission and ministry